What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily, and in this video, we are checking out the new iPhone 16 and the 16 Plus. It's a 2-for-1 unboxing. Now, I think that this year's iPhone 16s are absolutely worth upgrading to. They're decisively better phones in more ways than one, and a way bigger upgrade compared to the iPhone 15, which, let's be honest, was hardly an upgrade at all. We'll get into all that in just a minute, but first things first, let me just quickly show you what comes inside the boxes. We'll start off with a big one, the 16 Plus, and sliding off the lid, here it is in Ultramarine. Kind of a new shade of blue this year. All the colors really look a lot better, I think. Now, you do still get a couple of things inside the box. Apple tosses in one of their nice braided nylon USB-C charging cables. I think this is the best charging cable included with really any smartphone nowadays, so I can't complain about that, but you don't get a proper charging brick to pair it with. And as far as everything else, well, there's just a couple of pieces of paper. One tells you that these iPhones don't have a SIM card tray anymore, eSIM only here in the US, and the other is just some instructions and legal info. No more Apple stickers included in the box, which is a bit of a bummer, but supposedly you can get free Apple stickers if you just ask an employee at the store. The regular size iPhone 16 has all the same things inside its box, of course, but the pink color, I think this is my favorite shade of the iPhone 16 this year. It's like a very vibrant, almost magenta. There's the same nice USB-C cable and the same couple of pieces of paper, and that's pretty much it as far as the unboxing experience. Pretty simple with really not much included anymore. And as we peel back those protective stickers and power them on, you will come across a new setup screen on these iPhone 16s that showcase camera control. The all-new side-mounted physical feature, aka a button, even though Apple hates you calling it that. And I'll talk more in depth about camera control in just a moment. You get kind of a preview of it here, but it's basically a new way you can launch and interact with the camera app. Now, as far as pricing and color options, the regular iPhone 16 still starts at $799, and the larger 16 Plus is $899. You can spec them out in either 128, 256, or 512 gigabytes of storage, and the colors this year, well, you already saw the two best ones in my opinion, pink and ultramarine, which is this year's shade of blue. There's also a teal green, and then black and white if you're kind of boring. So this year's new iPhone 16 and 16 Plus are the same basic size and general form factor as the previous few regular iPhones. And I say that only because the Pro iPhones this year are both bigger. But the regular iPhone 16 is once again a 6.1-inch phone. That's the screen size corner to corner. And the larger 16 Plus is 6.7 inches. There's also a lot of talk about bezels this year, that thin black border framing the visible screen area. And on these regular iPhones, Apple might have slimmed it down a bit for just a 0.5% higher screen to body ratio, but these regular iPhones have noticeably thicker bezels compared to the Pro iPhones this year, and the Pro iPhones are both bigger overall by a few millimeters all around. It's kind of hard to see that, so it's not a big deal really, but something I thought I would at least explain. Around back, these regular iPhones retain their premium all-glass and aluminum build that you'd certainly expect from any Apple product. I don't believe the material is any different compared to last year, not any tougher in any capacity, but the color scheme is great. I love that Apple's design team found their saturation toggle again and boosted the vibrance. I know it sounds dumb, but a lot of people buy a new phone because of the fun new colors. It's something they can show off. A lot of times it makes it very obvious that it is a new device, and I think it's something the iPhone 15s lacked that disappointed a lot of customers. The other indication that this is a new iPhone, that camera module is also new. Apple does this like every other year. They sort of just randomly redesign the placement for the lenses. Don't get me wrong, the cameras are also improved, and I'll talk about that too. But aside from contributing to case companies' huge increase in profits, with everyone needing a new case for the new phone, the double-stacked camera lens doesn't signify anything in particular. Though I will say, the camera bump seems like it sticks out even further this year, so a case is definitely necessary just so the phone can lay flat on a table. Taking a look around, most everything else on these iPhone 16s is the same as the previous iPhones. There's a volume buttons on the left side below the action button. Nothing at the top of the phones. At the bottom, the USB-C port flanked by speaker and microphone cutouts. On the right side, however, the power button now shares its space with something new. Towards the bottom, you'll now see a physical feature called camera control. It is an actual button. even though Apple refuses to call it a button, and it has additional pressure and touch sensitivity commands. Camera control is a recessed button, so kind of a dimple or divot compared to the outward power button. It feels different, and I think this also helps combat any accidental presses when you grip the phone a certain way. Now, the camera control obviously is associated mainly with the camera app itself, along with a few camera adjacent tools. You currently can't customize this feature much beyond setting it to a single or double click and then changing out which camera function it launches to. By default, one press of the camera control, just like pressing a button, will launch the camera app itself from the lock screen, from the home screen, and from any other app you're currently in. And like I said, you can change that action to a double press to make it harder to trigger accidentally. And you also can set camera control to launch the QR code scanner, magnifier, or do nothing at all for whatever reason. You can't currently customize camera control anymore beyond those couple of options. Now, when you're inside the camera app, clicking camera control again fully will snap a picture. I mean, let's be honest, it's literally a physical camera shutter button, basically, but it's also pressure sensitive and has, I guess, swipe controls. That's the most appropriate description. So if you just sort of lightly press on camera control or squeeze it, but don't actually click it fully all the way down, you'll be presented with a slider of whatever the last camera setting option was. And if you run your finger across camera control, almost like a dial, you'll slide through whatever setting you're working with. And to switch between the different camera settings and options that are associated with camera control, well, you double squeeze it, but don't click it down all the way, just a generous sort of double squeeze, and then you can swipe through all the settings and functions of the camera that camera control utilizes. In playing around with this for a little while, it really takes some getting used to. The placement of camera control itself on the side of the phone is different, it's new, and it takes some maneuvering to figure out how you can quickly click it depending on your phone grip. And between the regular sized iPhone 16 and the Plus, it feels a bit awkward, really, on both phones, regardless of the size difference. When you're squeezing and swiping through the camera options, the most useful use case of the camera control function, I think, is zoom. Sliding the zoom in and out with camera control feels very natural, and having easy access to the depth of field, the exposure, focal lengths, and new photographic styles and tones is nice, but I don't know how many people mess with those settings often enough to justify a whole entire new physical feature on the phone itself that revolves around it. This is a really interesting addition to the entire iPhone lineup this year, and I'm curious to see how much use it'll actually get. A couple features associated with camera control, like the new visual intelligence tool, are actually not even on this phone yet. More on that in a moment. So there will be some more stuff to come, but in the meantime, this is definitely going to take some getting used to. So speaking of the stuff that's still to come on the new iPhones, Apple Intelligence, their myriad of AI features they've been demoing and talking about nonstop since earlier this summer, and sort of the theme for the iPhone 16s this year, well, it wasn't ready in time for the launch for whatever reason. Apple Intelligence is coming later this year via a myriad of different software updates. There seems to be a roadmap of sorts where different chunks of Apple Intelligence stuff will be released in different updates month after month. And this honestly is pretty disappointing. I mean, the signs at the Apple Store all reference Apple Intelligence, even though it's not on these new iPhones yet. Even the demo iPhones on the table have Apple Intelligence videos playing. I feel like as an Apple Store employee, this would be a tough thing to explain to a potential customer. And there's that saying that goes something like, don't buy something today for the promise of what's to come tomorrow. Because of this Apple Intelligence situation, I think the iPhone 16s this year feel just not so new. Perhaps a month or two from now, we'll have everything AI, and it'll be like buying these phones on day one yet again. But in the meantime, the lack of everything software-wise that Apple spent the bulk of their iPhone announcement talking about feels like a detrimental thing for the launch of this phone. On the bright side, Apple's latest iOS update, iOS 18, does bring about some new software updates and changes that attempt to make the phone feel new. The bulk of iOS 18 that I think people will care about have to do with the new customization features, like the ability to set your app icons to a specific color and change up Control Center. I have a dedicated video all about that if you want to learn more. There's also changes to a number of Apple's apps like Photos, new ways to message, improvements to Mail, Safari. There's a new Passwords app. So fresh out of the box, if you haven't yet updated to iOS 18 on your current iPhone at least, this new one has some new stuff to kind of make it feel new. But iOS 18 is actually available on most iPhones, even a lot of the older ones. So plenty of these features you might have already had. Apple Intelligence, however, well, that's reserved for only the iPhone 15 Pros and then the new iPhone 16s. So just keep that in mind if AI or Apple Intelligence is something you're seriously interested in. When Apple Intelligence finally launches, all the new features and capabilities will be powered by a new, faster processor and upgraded internals inside these phones. And this is a big deal because you might remember that last year's iPhone 15 didn't get a speed or processor upgrade at all. The new iPhone 16s are now powered by Apple's A18 processor, up from the A16 last year, and 8 gigabytes of RAM, also a bump up, finally, from 6 gigs that we saw on a lot of the previous iPhones. Now, I actually think that because the iPhone 16s are basically a 2-generation upgrade in processor and 2 gig increase in RAM over last year, you may see some noticeable speed and performance boosts, especially if you work your phone pretty hard or play some of those new game titles that Apple referenced in their keynote. This is one area in particular that makes the iPhone 16s well worth the upgrade. And I also think that with these internals and the promise of Apple Intelligence, the iPhone 16s will be great long-term plays too. I mean, these phones have 2024 specs and capabilities now. Last year's phones did not have the current hardware, so you're starting from day one on a great foundation, and looking ahead, this phone will probably be plenty capable for 4 or 5 years at least. I think it's great that Apple pushed the boundaries with performance on these regular or non-pro iPhones this year. It makes it feel like you get the full upgraded package this year. Nothing was left out or cheaped out using last year's parts and pieces. And whether these internals were truly made for Apple Intelligence or not, like Apple says, is beyond the point. You just actually get good upgraded components on a new phone this year, unlike last year. What's also supposed to be good on this year's iPhones is battery life. Now, Apple briefly mentioned in their keynote, without much context, that the iPhone 16s had the best battery life ever. They didn't put any numbers to that claim initially, and on Apple's website, the new iPhone 16s seem to have like an extra hour or two of life in certain circumstances based on Apple's advertised measurements. It's not nearly as great as it seemed from Apple's announcements, and some initial tests are only showing maybe a 5% boost in longevity compared to last year, but I guess in the coming weeks, we'll see if these phones do in fact have any further battery life improvements. As for charging speeds though, the 16s can now charge from 0 to 50% in about 30 minutes over USB-C, and also support faster 25-watt wireless MagSafe speeds and 15-watt Qi 2 wireless charging speeds. So if you do find yourself burning through your battery before the day's end, you'll at least be juicing up a bit quicker across the board. So let's just get this out of the way. The new iPhone 16s have the exact same displays as last year, which means they're the same Super Retina XDR OLED panels with the same resolution, 2556 by 1179 on the regular and 2796 by 1290 on the Plus. And yes, they're once again 60 Hz refresh rate displays. Now, the thing about that is every knowledgeable, tech-savvy shopper knows the lower refresh rate on the regular iPhones is a huge bummer, especially for the price. But those tech-savvy, spec-conscious people aren't ever buying a regular iPhone. For everyone else in the world, especially the average consumer, the average iPhone user who doesn't upgrade every year, the 60 Hz display literally does not matter. And in a lot of cases, a good chunk of regular iPhone buyers can't tell a difference anyway. And they don't care either. Aside from maybe keeping costs down, yes, I know that's kind of a joke, but still, I also think that Apple themselves aren't too concerned with bringing 120 Hz or ProMotion to these regular iPhones. I mean, like it or not, That feature may bring some folks to the Pro iPhones as a Pro feature, so they snag that customer base, and everyone else who wants an iPhone is just happy to get one at under $1,000. I know it's the principle of the thing. Apple is arguably giving customers a worse product or a worse experience than they could. Even cheap $300 Android phones offer 120Hz displays now, but the only people clamoring about that are probably the people who would never buy this regular iPhone anyway. Also, I don't know that Apple has done anything with the speakers on these iPhones in quite some time. You've got what seems to be the same dual speaker stereo setup with one big speaker at the bottom alongside some microphone holes and the secondary speaker in the earpiece. I think the phone sounds the same as last year's phone, which sounded the same as the previous year's iPhones and so on. And here's a sound sample so you can determine that for yourself. Last but not least, the big focus on all these iPhone 16s once again this year was on the cameras. The specs on paper do seem to mimic what we saw on last year's iPhone 15's camera, but Apple is actually calling the 48 megapixel main lens this year a fusion lens now because of its ability to be used for both standard photos and cropped in 2x zoom pictures. The secondary lens is also a seemingly new 12 megapixel ultra-wide camera with a better aperture to let in more light, and it also enables a new macro mode on these phones for taking close-up shots. So collectively, even though the regular iPhone 16s only have 2 lenses, Apple suggests this is kind of like having a 4-lens setup now, with the regular, the ultra-wide, the macro, and the Fusion 2x telephoto. The selfie camera, by the way, remains unchanged, and as far as the rest of the new features and functions, Apple mainly spent a lot of time talking about the new photographic styles feature. Basically a way for you to set a certain look for the pictures you take. It's not quite a filter, but it's kind of like a filter with more advanced mapping and color tones. And while I'm not so sure this is something too many people will use regularly, if you do want to find the perfect look for your shots, or maybe just want to set a new default camera tone or color, you can do that. All in all, paired with the camera control function too, the cameras once again play a big role in what's new on the iPhone 16s, and I'll of course have some camera comparison videos coming to the channel soon, so we can really test that out. So even though it doesn't seem like a ton, the new iPhone 16s this year do offer way more in upgrades and changes than last year for sure. The big things for me are the better processor and extra RAM, which will pair up with Apple Intelligence eventually. The purported battery improvements and faster charging speeds are great too. I'm sure the camera is better, hopefully in a way that makes sense for regular everyday shooting. Yeah, the 60Hz display is still a bummer, but it is what it is. That hasn't stopped anyone from buying these iPhones before, but what do you guys think about the new iPhone 16s? Will you be upgrading this year? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, of course. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this video though. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already. I'll see you guys later.